Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Health and Wellness. Today, our expert is Dr. Cheri MacDonald. She is a family and marriage therapist. She's a licensed hypnotherapist, and she's a trauma recovery specialist. Dr. Cheri is going to be talking to us about how we can cope with trauma and stress in a life that's paced so fast, so global, we almost don't have time to even stop and think. So she's going to be sharing her mission and her message. So Dr. Cheri, thank you so much for saying yes to me.
Oh, thank you. This is a great honor.
Wonderful. So why don't we go ahead and jump in. Please share with my tribe what it is that you do and what your passion is in helping people overcome and thrive through trauma.
I'm most excited and most passionate about this issue. I have been working for 35 years in the field of psychotherapy, and I have been, I'm very much in a full-time private practice, so I have been able to listen and witness hundreds of thousands of people literally in my office and see them transform and create miracles in front of me, and it's been a very fulfilling career. And at the same time, over the years, I've discovered that there was something missing. And I think what I give credit that got my attention was the increasingly fast-paced world and the exposure to the bigger trials and tribulations and tragedies that we're faced with. And so it was a wake-up call for me. And so where my office is situated, it was close enough where I had people flocking to my office from the Las Vegas tragedy of Route 91, where 58 of our people were killed, and in a land of confusion and terror, and found it much harder to get their life back in order. And in the midst of that, we had 2 fires here that in this county that burned 83% of the mountains around here, and people were losing their homes. And so it was like one fracture on top of another. And then within that, the tragedy of the borderline mass shooting of college night, where all these students, young people, were killed, and that was just 5 miles away, and some of the same people from the Las Vegas shooting were there. And then within a year from that or so, we have the most recent loss, and that's the Kobe Bryant helicopter loss. And that took 8 souls. It impacted so many people because Kobe Bryant's pretty well known, as we know, internationally. And so we're all touched by each other's lives, more so than we realize. And so in the midst of this, I recognize that when people come to my office, they want to deal with a hard time. One, I'm recognizing we all have trauma. Science is showing that, we go through developmental trauma. Life is in the opposition. And so if we live the law of opposition, we're ebbs and flows, we know joy because we have sorrow, we're going to have trauma mixed into that. And then we have various degrees. And obviously these tragedies I just pointed out, they're big traumas if you can categorize it that way. But how we master life, or what we're given in life, and what we're handed out, impacts how we cope as we go on. And so but people have not ignored that. And so when these big things happen, you can start to see the crumbling foundation, or the lack of solid foundation that people are struggling, and they get these tools and they can't apply them because their own foundation's cracked. And then when they heal it, and in a therapy situation, let's say, they go out and their community, their significant others, and their community is fractured because these big events happen, and we don't even think to fix our community. And then our nation, and the international, we just keep going forward because we go through fast paced. And then we have so much access to one another, but not heart to heart. Unfortunately, the internet is a great thing. Like today's show, I'm so pleased to have the internet, and we can share, but people are not sharing face to face as much. We hear this, how our teens are not getting the socialization. Yet we become more and more vulnerable to the hardships the internet can offer, whether it's bullying, cyberbullying, whether it's now stealing our identities. I probably go on and on, but these fracture us even more. And this is a fracturing community that we walk out into. So I just felt like we got to do more. We have to do more, and people need to heal fully. And so, and what we need each other to do that. We are relational beings. We're not meant to be islands unto ourselves, nor can we become whole without one another. And life is easier if we do sometimes, if we don't have to deal with another person, but then you deal with loneliness and you can't grow. We really can't grow because we only know what we know. And though I believe we all know more than we know, we learn more from one another and the feedback from one another. And so that's where my second book came in. My first book was inspired by just everyone else coming, and that is Whispers from Within. I realized dealing with one-on-one people that the real healing comes from the inside out. I can offer I can offer that human touch to touch I talk about. I can offer insight. I can offer all my training and my education. Yet I found that the biggest healing comes when people take responsibility. We take these tools and go inside and decipher, discern, intuit what they need to heal from the inside out. And that's where I say we know more than we know, but we have to show up. And so that's where I started out with that. And I gained that insight from a personal story from my sister. I have a sister who was born 5 years later than me with cerebral palsy. And she was born with cerebral palsy because my brother and I came home from preschool with the German measles, and my mother was 5 months pregnant, and so my sister got the German measles. And my dad just told me recently they called her the blueberry muffin syndrome. And that sounds heartbreaking because she's born with these purple dots all over her, and premature, and she's been a fighter. Take a long story short, she turned out to be the heart of our home. She is deaf and has the cerebral palsy with regards to pretty crippled, and she has been a fighter. And she has mastered things, graduating high school, driving a car that she should never have mastered, and then gone through hardships that most people should go, and has maintained a sense of peace and joy and love for all with someone who should not have been able to do that. And so she inspired me and taught me that just by her example, that we can weather more than we think we can. And that we are stronger than we know we are, a lot of us, but that comes from the inside out. And so, I know that's foundational. And so because our community is so fractured, I realized that we need to go out in the community. And so my goal is to take the therapy out into the community. And I started to root, rebound, and rise is what I call it. And where we come together, and I'm hoping sometime this can be bigger than it is now, but come together and work with one another in 1, showing up for one another, 2, holding each other accountable. The first step is we got to wake up. And I call it reawakening. Wake up and be accountable to one another, to ourselves. And when we came out of the womb, being born is pretty traumatic. We don't talk about that. It's pretty traumatic. In the hypnotherapy world, we talk about how traumatic going through that dark tunnel and being pulled out head first, and into a foreign world. It's probably more traumatic than and we just don't know. We just don't remember. And so foundationally, we know hardship. And but we learn to root by taking our, standing and learning to walk, stand up and walk. And that took a lot of hard work. And so we have to start where we have to start where we're at and then root there, and then learn, where we came from. And sometimes that requires going back and repairing some of the fractures along the way in our own personal lives. And then we need to rejuvenate, and rejuvenate through, our relationships. First, our dual relationships, whether it's with people, money, careers, education. We create these relationships. Either we're embraced and we grow from them, and sometimes we're raped by them, literally raped by them. We can lose our money, we can, we get betrayed, we get hurt, and we need to understand how we've managed those or not managed those, and how they can begin to help us. If we leave them fractured, we can't evolve into a sense of self. And that's what I call realization, where we work to find ourself. And it's our first glimmering from growing out of the pseudo self, the false self that comes from being fractured, to defining who we are. And that is going inside and finding, I call our ideal self, and that's our higher self. And as we evolve into our higher self, we it's this third time we get to wrestle with, who do I want to be? How do I want to present? And how do I differentiate from where I came? And then how do I show up in my community, my family, and my world? And a lot of people, they don't know they can even show up. I think with my sister, even though at 5 years old, I clicked that I came home with the German measles. And for years, deep inside, without me being aware of it, I wrestled with the fracture of being responsible for her German measles. And I carried this guilt around without even knowing I carried it around. And so I didn't show up. I would be shy. I'd be reserved. I would, I would struggle with how showing up. How can I show up when she can't even walk? And and this was not even conscious. It took decades for me to realize what I attached to. My mother and father, I just had a conversation with my 85-year-old father this last 2 weeks ago, and he said, I talked about this on NBC, and he said, I never knew that. I never knew you carried that, and because they didn't give it to me, I didn't know I did that. And so we create these attachments that we don't know we create, and that's because it will take time to know ourselves. And so as we go through the steps of realization, we're able to tap into our heart. And I feel like our heart carries two emotions, either fear or love, and they don't exist simultaneously. And so when we function from a place of fear, we're squeezing the love out of our heart, and we are becoming, and that's where the beginnings of our trauma, they call it trauma brain. Our trauma brain takes over. And when we have these parts of our brain that take over, we get paralyzed, or we freeze, freezing, or we fight or flight. And but we don't know how to engage our rational mind and manage these reactions and to be proactive on what is the best step to take. And so we're reactive. And so we are really reacting to our world. And sometimes when we get overloaded, that's where we fall into temptations of substance abuse or other kind of alcoholism that numbs us because we're an overload. And then if we have prone to addiction, we're in trouble. And so it's a whole other, animal of trauma that we have to deal with. And we're all susceptible to it. And this is where we go out in the community, we realize we're all more alike than different. And then when we can realize that, we're not scared to show up. And then we're not scared to reach out and embrace a human being. And that's really important to me. I feel like that is key to why we're here, is to help one another, lift one another. And so then we can recognize, oh, I'm coming from fear or not. If we just already have the love, then we can grow that. And the love is we want to show up, and we want to embrace others. And so and this is where we can discern, oh my gosh, this is when my higher self shows up, and this is when my shadow shows up. And we don't discard the shadow or the pseudo self. We embrace and we love ourselves within our own fractures, why we know we're growing. We learn from our mistakes. We can grow from them, and we don't just keep trying to ignore them so they trip us up. And so we know where to ask or what to ask for help with. And so the love grows, and you can see certain people walk around and they just kind of radiate love and joy, and they know, oh man, we're supposed to be happy. We're meant to be happy. We're meant to be joyful. We're meant to love, not be miserable and subservient to the hardship or the fears that hit us. And once we recognize that, then the power of our voice shows up, and I call this revive, and we come alive, and we start, when we start using our voice, there's some intuitive remembering that we have one of the greatest gifts, and that's free will, and we have the voice of choice. And fear cripples that. If we don't know who we are, we can't even make a choice. If we are strangled by betrayal or in a power struggle of opposition, and we won't instead of embracing it and learning from it and pulling the carving off the carbon from the diamond and letting our light shine, we won't know what choice to make to even revive. And so everyone wants to hear from another person, but we forget to show up ourselves. And so each of us have something to teach another person. And as we start to express who we are, what we want, what we have to give, then another person is invited to come in and do the same. And that's the purpose of getting out of the therapy room, so we can start communicating these loving ways, not competitively, not to step on someone's head to rise above, but to join hands as a community to rise above. And then as we do that, once we know our free choice, then we can tap into what I call restore that's remembering that we have this intuitive knowledge. This is where we have discernment, and we do know more than we know we know. And this is where we start using our knowledge and sharing that knowledge, and then choosing when. Because with power of will, we don't just all give it out. We use discernment to protect ourselves, protect another, to give ourselves, to give another. And this is really where you put the oxygen mask on yourself and make sure you've done inventory to really rise and express the higher self. And again, you're being proactive here. All you know is proactive. You know that you just give what you have and don't worry about tomorrow. You live in the present. This is when the presence of the moment shows up. You know, so many people walk around and they're robots in this world. And if you drive down the street, the light turns red, you stop. It turns green, you go. And then accidents happen because people forget to look right and left, and someone went through the red light. And but when we're awake, we're in the moment. You know, we get to show up our higher self, and we can stop even at a green light if necessary, because we are ahead of the game. And also with joy. You know, and and then then I say, then we can really resurrect fully as our ideal self, and we live from inspiration. Someone told me a great definition of spiritual maturity is making decisions from the inside out, not the outside in. And so here that you just live by that rule. Yeah, if you just wake up and you live by, and that's where people who have practiced certain patterns of behavior that keep them inspired. And so I teach a roadmap on how to find your own tools that fit you, that you know you're going to follow through with and you're going to do, and practice on consistent basis, with consistent practice and effort. And for the mind, the body, and the heart, because if we just deal with one, we neglect the others, we stay fractured. And and then we have risen, you know, and when we rise, we're ready now to get back. We know where we need to show up, where we're needed. And so we just have this knowing, and that's when we're in alignment, and things start happening in our lives that we don't know how that happens, but we know it's supposed to be happening. And those, sometimes people will say, they'll come and they'll say, you won't believe this, and they'll tell me an epiphany that happened like this, and it's like, it's a surprise because they don't know how to make it happen all the time. But those are what are supposed to happen all the time, and they're called miracles. And miracles are everyday incidences, and they happen because we are aligned to see them, because they happen anyway. We either are present for them or not. And so the goal is that we're all miracles to one another, and not just our own life. And that is pretty much the program, I think, the key for our healing, because trauma is going to happen. It's not that trauma can't happen, it's that we can triumph over the trauma, and, you know, and then we can grow greater and brighter, because it's only out of the carbon does the diamond come. And so it's as do we carve the carbon off our diamond so we can allow our light to shine as brightly as it really is capable of. I said a lot, but that's basically it.
There's so many nuggets in there, Dr. Cheri, and so many things that I personally can relate to. You know, having gone on my own growth journey and really trying to identify those things that were wounds, unintentional wounds even, right?
Yes.
From things in our families or things we perceived as children. It's so profound. And I want to take this all the way back to when we're children, the way that we perceive the difficulties, maybe the challenges in the family or breakdowns of family, anything like that, we create a story in our head, don't we?
Yes.
And that story can end up being like self-inflicted trauma, but we're just a child. There's a certain point where the children don't have a way of reasoning through. That doesn't make any sense. We just receive it as a reality. And then we go into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s with these strings to that spot in our history. And when I hear you talk about healing and trauma and that brokenness, or like fractures in our self, right?
Right.
A lot of them come from the things that we learned or taught ourselves because of our experiences in childhood. And do you see a lot of connection in a lot of people when they come to you, that you can sometimes go all the way back to when they were 4 or 5 or 6, and the healing starts not in what they're currently experiencing, but it's all kind of rooted in an original story? Is that something that you experience as a therapist?
I see it a lot. And I think that, and that's what the most recent studies of trauma have been about, is that what strikes, again, they call developmental trauma. We don't want to be that way. And some people will come in and say, okay, I just want to deal with this problem. I don't want to do my family history. I don't want to go back to my childhood. I just want to get this out of the way. And don't we all? So we start there because we start where we're at, but usually they'll take me back to 4 or 5, even 2. A law of addiction is established in 0 to 2. And these are, like you said, so if some self-inflicted, some the interpretation, because the prefrontal cortex isn't formed yet, and so it's not rational. But things happen, and how we interpret it. Or now there are even some scientists saying that we create memories in ourselves. We bring it through birth with us. And so it may not be, it may be memory that's not even ours. And so if that's true, and that becomes more and more, it's not all our fault, but it's worth it to go and explore it so we can understand now how to apply that. Because again, opposition is going to be there. Mm-hmm. It's how we do with it, and it's meant to teach us something. I really believe that. That's the key here. Is life is meant to be a teacher for us, not to beat us down to a pulp and bury us 6 feet under early. It's meant to help us grow taller and taller through sometimes hard things.
Yeah. I know that to be true in my own life, Dr. Cheri. There's been a lot of journeys that I've taken, or I should say paths to get to the result, which is the healing I've been looking for, to find that wholeness. I mean, it's impossible to live a life without trauma, really. It's impossible to live a life without being impacted by some trauma. We live in an imperfect world. We live around people who are also wounded. And I've always said that wounded people wound people. So depending on the percentage of wounded people that you have in your circle, I think we're impacted by that. But you said something about, our choice, our choosing to find that healing. And I have also seen the reverse to be true, that when we do the healing, it does sometimes pull people along in their own healing journey as well. So like you said, community is so important. But I think when you're healing, and maybe you can shed some light on this, sometimes it's a solitary journey for a while, because not everybody is ready to deal with the emotions that they have. And when it comes to trauma specifically, everybody processes that differently, through their personality or through their life experience. Some people don't want to talk to anybody. Some people are like throwing up on everybody all the time verbally, And so you have all of these variations of how people receive, experience, and process or don't process the trauma. But that community piece at some point, I think, is incredibly important. But I do think sometimes it's a solitary journey for a while. Am I right on that? At least it's been true for me.
Very much so. And so to make it clear, I think at first it is a solitary journey, and I'm talking about people leave the therapy room, so they've done their work. And I do feel like, when we really do the healing, we go what I call over a transformational bridge. And that transformational bridge is meant to be a solo journey. So it's not, no matter if you are someone who throws up all over everybody, you're still everyone, for that self-reflection, that going inside, you have to know yourself first. And that's where the discernment with starting where you're at, that's all solo journey. Even processing some of the opposition is solo journey, getting to know yourself. And then before you can really open your heart to another. And so that's where the self-responsibility comes in, and accountability.
Mm-hmm. And how do you help someone go through the process of healing trauma? Because it's multi-layered.
Yes.
I hear you saying you have to start where you're at, but I feel like that's just a jumping off point. It's really not the point.
Right. And one is, why start where you're at? Because it's that's what we know right now, and that we can't. I respect that we don't rush through things, and the small things come great things. So we go through small steps, and that's why people come in, they have one problem, they just want to fix it, but sometimes we need to take a breath, and I think the first thing someone needs is they need to be listened to. They need to be heard. They need to know that they can be heard, and that no matter how silly or how embarrassed they're about their issue, they need to know that those are blocks, not the truth. The truth is pain, right? And joy is joy. And so sometimes they just need a safe place to be, and that's being listened to. Sometimes they need to be listened to with our ears, and then sometimes they need just permission to be paralyzed for a while, and to allow that paralysis to kind of be like hibernation for a bear. That's healing. And then before they come out. And so every step has its purpose, and there's a time and season for everything, and everyone's different with that. And so, but I think the first is they have to have a safe place to be heard, and know that they can be listened to, and know that their pain can be witnessed. Because sometimes witnessing is in of itself is so healing. And then take the voice and talk about it.
I love what you're saying, and the words that I use to express what you're saying is holding a space for somebody.
Yes.
It's
exactly.
like just almost like a cocoon, so that they don't feel like they have to justify or fight or make excuses or even explain. Because I know for me, there's sometimes that something's not right, but you can't figure out what it is. You just know. There's a knowing that I can't figure this thing out that's really tripping me up in my life.
Right. So true. That's a good way to put it. Exactly.
So I feel like holding a space for each other, back to that community point that you said, is so, so important. You also use two yoga terms. I know you're a yoga instructor: rooting and rising.
Yes.
And
grounding. Yes.
Yeah. And as you were talking about rooting and rising, I really want to talk about that, because I think if, I do yoga, you teach yoga, so those words have a certain very specific meaning to how we physically work through an emotional or a mental thing, right? We really focus on rooting, grounding through our feet, or, and getting that foundation underneath. Can you talk a little bit about how that rooting and rising from the yoga standpoint, moving it into what that looks like for someone who may be really going through something right now that feels like floods of water overwhelming them? How can they use those tools to really kind of find a centered place for a moment and grab that breath you're talking about?
So what I love about yoga is that it does remind us that we are, complex, and that we are mind, body, and spirit, and that with trauma gets stored it does get stored in the cells of our body. We have to get it out. And so we have to use through movement a lot of times, because our voice is one way, hearing is another way, crying is a way, but physical movement and taking a stand. You start with Tadasana, the mountain pose, that is just standing on 2 feet, where you learn the proper posture of rooting into the feet, from your soles to your feet, your balls, your feet, your heels. You wiggle your toes, and you gravitate up where you get the right posture of standing. And a lot of times when we have trauma, we start feeling weak at the knees, and you say raise the knees so you can include your quads. And a lot of people like their knees start to shake, and because their trauma is so foundational, they can feel weak in the knees. And then when they rise up, and they can't navel up and in, they can't take their navel in, because there's usually a sense of no self, and then they try to stand with their chin up, and they just feel this weakness around their neck, and all of that's the heart stuff. And so it can be very insightful in where we're holding the memories, the body memories of our trauma, for one. Some people will close their eyes, and I love to have people close their eyes, and they lose their balance on 2 feet, because they haven't learned how to root from, and that tells them, okay, I've got some unresolved emotion that I need to walk through my body. And when they master that, and you feel this strong, you close your eyes, you can stand strong and tall, and then you start with the breath and breathe, fully, and work those inner muscles that release this tension from way deep, small little inner muscles. If you breathe correctly, it's a workout. And so as you breathe, you're freeing those cells up, and you're oxygenating your body. That a lot of times fear doesn't allow us. Fear causes us to have shallow breath. fear causes us to kind of choke on our words, and we don't work those muscles, and we get weak from the inside out. And so as we do that, a lot of times people will release emotion, and they'll tell me, I don't want to, I started crying in the middle of yoga. I'm doing yoga, I'm crying, because they give themselves permission to express and release, where you don't know how you're storing emotion in our body, memories in our body. But we have, they even said we have the cells to have eyes in our kidneys. Our body sees and hears from all areas in our body that we do. And so we'll store, if we hear a sound, I had a little girl one time, the earthquake hit, I think it was 94. And she was like 5 years old, and she couldn't sleep at night because she resonated with the sound of the earthquake. She was safe, but it was really noisy where she lived. And so she couldn't sleep at night, and so she was storing that sound inside of her body. And so we had to do some physical exercises, movement, for her to be able to release that. And we don't know how we store things in our body, and kids are more likely to store it in the body than memory, and that's because they're not, the prefrontal cortex is not stored, so they store it in the cells of their body, and it comes out in wiggling, like maybe hyperactive, maybe it's their ADD, and maybe they're traumatized. And so this is where yoga kind of expresses that. And as we rise, the energy shifts too. We get in tune with our subtle bodies, which is the energy body, and we start feeling sensations in our body that is freeing. And it's hard, sometimes it's tingling, sometimes it's warm, sometimes it's cool. But when we quiet down, then we can feel these different sensations. And then we can also hear the noise in our head. And it's the whirlings of the mind that keep us trapped. And as we master rising, we also master quieting the mind. And we learn that the mind can stay quiet even if there's a storm around us. And that is what they call samadhi, and that is considered peace. And so we all strive for peace. And so this is why I feel so passionate and how I believe the work is inside out, because we can't control the storms that come our way, but we can control the storms inside if we take that self-care. So I hope that answered your question.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I want to touch on, because we're talking about crisis and trauma. It is so important. And I've talked about this in conversations, is how our bodies store emotions. I went through a season where my left hip was giving me so much trouble, like just tight and a lot of trouble, and no injury. It was just a thing. And there were a lot of things happening in my life at that time. And one particular issue was really strong. And then I did some work with different people, and I went through different things. And one day I realized that wasn't happening anymore. But what's interesting is that, it's 3 trillion cells in our body, and that's our memory. And I think people don't understand. They think your brain is where the memory is. That's the CPU. That's the area where it accesses it. But sometimes, like you said, the weak in the knees, while that doesn't happen to be mine, I would love for people, as they're listening to you, to really think through their body issues. It could be joint pain, it could be chronic headaches. We tend to think of headaches and shoulder stress, which is like really easy to identify. But there's a lot of ways that our emotions express themselves in our bodies, like you said. And I personally used yoga, got into yoga, because it's, you said, the worrying of our mind keeps us trapped. And I'm a thinker all the time. And so when you think about things, it's good to think about them, but you can think too much. And I think the yoga mat gives you a safe place where it's kind of like home base. Like, when you played tag as a kid and it was like nobody could tag you if you were at home base. The yoga mat's kind of like my emotional home base. And so I do think that it's a powerful tool. Do you utilize that physical movement as part of your therapy for people to kind of help them literally physically work out the traumas and the crisis that they're experiencing?
I do very much so. And depending where the trauma is trapped, we talk about it, and we use the specific poses that help them work it out and work out the issues. And then I encourage a regular ritual for everyone to create their own ritual that includes a variety of modalities. Not yoga is one of them, movement, but again, meditation, prayer, writing your story, if it's scripture reading, intuitive cards, but everyone finds their own. But I really encourage consistent practice and effort to begin. I like beginning the day, but it could be ending the day, it could be in the middle of the day, but they show up every time. And you talk about that mat being a very safe place. I really encourage people to show up at the same time, same place. Again, we're bodies of energy, but everything's energy. And if we show up at the same place, at the same time, it's like a vortex of energy, of safe place. And it builds from yesterday and from the day before and day before, and it becomes a healing place. And this is we create our own healing place. And so I like to think of that way. And so when our memory is, when we sit down there, oh, I'm healing. And so no matter what we brought in to the room before we sit in that place, it's left behind, because now we have this established memory of healing. And so we put our bodies in this healing place, our minds in this, and our heart in this healing place. And so I feel very passionate about, that's how we have to do our own work and show up for ourselves.
It's so powerful. I don't know that people realize how much our bodies are a part of that journey. We tend to think about just emotions. And one of the other things I talk about is that alignment of mind and body and spirit, that we're a whole being, and all of these things impact us on all of those levels in some way, shape, or form, right? And so you're basically detangling those parts when you work with someone. Is that true?
Right. And everyone is, like you said, everyone is on their own journey, and so individualistic, and the abundance and the deprivation is so individualistic as well. And so it is unwinding and finding your own. It's like we're all a snowflake, and our design is beautiful, but it's so different. So we can't follow someone else's snowflake so easily. We have to find our own path and design our, and we want to alter our design. We can do that. Only we can do that. And but it's beautiful, but we need to understand it, and where it's tangled up, or it's knotted up, or it has a hole in it, we want to fix that and mend that, and through our own knitting, or crocheting for lack of that. And the other thing, we don't really talk about the nutrition of the body, but it plays a big part of it. We're 60% water. Our heart and our brain is 73% water. And now, I love Frozen. The Frozen 2, that, Olaf says, water has memory. There's another way where we store memory is through being hydrated. And when we're dehydrated, it affects our moods, and it's hard on our body. But water too is so being cognizant. And now, for PTSD, a lot of times they say, go to water. They have fountain. That's why we have the fountains. Go swimming, go and be water, but don't just go play in it, but just kind of like be in line with your own body. Are you recognizing that too, that from the elements, they're impacting us, and people who have gone through really hardships where they lack water, that alone can also create other issues, and that compounds. So this is where an example of a thread in the snowflake that we may not take care of.
It takes a lot of courage, Dr. Cheri. I've had people say they don't want to face things because they're afraid they'll never stop crying.
Yes.
How do you help someone navigate the courage when their fear is it'll overwhelm them again? Like they thought that they dealt with, by pushing it down, that it's dealt with, but it's not dealt with until it's not lurking in your body anymore.
Right. And that's a common fear, actually. And and it's probably a real fear. Eventually we do stop crying, but we don't feel like we stop crying. And so, and crying is painful. So I tell them, I get it. It hurts to cry. It hurts to cry. Who wants to voluntarily hurt and feel the pain? And so I tell them, you don't have to cry, and we can back up, and we go one step at a time. Again, small steps. But what we want is what we've identified. What we want is to heal. And so how we get there can be a variety of ways. And if you're not ready to go there through tears right now, we'll go through another way, but with a gift of healing. And so I encourage them, then we'll just begin with writing your story where there is no tears. And so there's always an avenue to get it. If our psyche needs to take us there, it'll take us there. And we're complex. It will find a way that's safe for us to go. And so that's what I tell in my hypnotherapy world. People are worried about hypnosis, like they're going to lose control, but all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. I'm just a vehicle. So it's the safest place because our unconscious is the most moral part of us, and it will protect us. And so if it's unsafe in one avenue, the mind is very again, the smartest part is, we're the brain, like you said, the brain is the brain, and then we have the heart and we have the gut, and they're all smart. They all offer different intelligence that help us along the way. So if we can't go, the heart creates too much tears, we may go to the rational mind, and we may go just what the gut tells us to go. And so what's great about this, we learn how intelligent we are. And we key into the creative imagination, which is our greatest tool, is our creative imagination. And so we learn that too. And so we just get creative.
It's so amazing. You talk about the mind, the heart, and the gut. It's so true. I had, I think mind, body, spirit, but I love that that's the way that we can process things. Because I think we think of intuition in the sense of, just follow your gut. I have daughters, and one of the things I've always taught them is, your subconscious mind has been collecting information since you were born, right? And this all plays into what we're talking about. So I tell them, if you ever get a sense, like in your gut, you're not safe or something's not right, I always say, just go with it. Because there's things happening, right? That we are identifying, but our body, our memory is all saying, no. Don't argue with I tell my girls, don't argue with that. It's better to be wrong and safe, right?
Right.
or to ignore it and stay. And so it's interesting that you say that, because I think about healing. I've never heard it said that you don't have to cry, because I have found that crying is a really useful tool. Just recently it's just a week ago, I had a day where I just got overwhelmed, like overwhelmed with all the things that I've had to carry. And I just couldn't stop crying. It's like, no matter, I just kept getting hit with waves of tears. And I was just like, okay, I guess I'll just cry, trying to wash the dishes, and I would start to cry. Or I would be, in the grocery store, not wanting to cry in the grocery store. And it probably lasted an hour and a half. And I cried hard for part of it. But, it is amazing how, for me, just yielding to it was so healing. No more resisting. I think, and maybe you can speak to this, when we resist our own healing, or we resist that process of getting through it, we're kind of re-traumatizing ourselves, whether or not it's tears, like you said, which is a new concept for me. But I like the idea that, if the tears are scary, there's another way. But I still think we have to take the other way at some point if we really want to get to the other side of healing.
Right. So don't get me wrong. When I share with a person, you don't have to cry. 9%.
I just think that's amazing. I don't mean it to come out critically. I'm just really like, wow, I never thought about not crying as part of the journey. I think that's fabulous.
Well, the reality is they usually do cry, because because the resistance is taken away then. And crying is a release. It releases us. And we need to do it on our own time. And so if we could commingle it with fear, that is resistance, right? And sometimes we'll cry out of anxiety, not release. And so an anxiety crying keeps you traumatized. I had someone from the fire, from the Route 91, and she had one of those meltdowns. She was in Costco, the crowds got to her. She went out on the sidewalk, she called me, she was crying, but she was hyperventilating. It was all fear. It wasn't releasing. And she couldn't release. But though she was crying, and she was crying a lot, but it wasn't a releasing kind of cry, because she thought she had no other choice but to hyperventilate and cry. So she just needed permission to calm down. You don't have to cry, and you can call. And so just being heard and hearing a calm voice on the side, she was able to stop hyperventilating, and she stopped crying at the same time. And then when she came in a safe place, she's able to generally cry it out. So time and place for everything, and to know what's behind it. I mean, your story was beautiful, because I think it takes, a mature soul to recognize what they're feeling, and then take action. I don't care if we I tell people belly laugh, cry your heart out, be human, it was just 3 weeks ago, I lost my mom. And so having that, I teach about grief all the time, but having that kind of grief is my first time I lost a parent. And I missed her by 40 minutes. I was on an airplane and I missed her. So I landed and my ride wasn't there. I knew, how you kind of get new. And I just, so I finally got hold of my dad, and of course he told me on the phone, and I just collapsed right there, right outside. I was nipple, and I just went to my knees and I just cried. And I could see I was making people uncomfortable, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I needed that release. I wasn't hysterical. I just felt the grief so authentically. I just cried, and people really didn't know what to do with me. I didn't need them to do anything with me, so it was okay. But I was so I'm grateful I did that, because I felt like I was honoring my mom in that silly way, but I was also honoring myself, that I'm human, and that was, and I was so many reasons I was crying at that moment, and so, but I just let it be. And it was what it was, and I was okay, and so yes, we need a release when we need a release, and I could tell that was a release versus a hyperventilating. I wasn't panicked. I was just grieving.
Yeah, you made an interesting point that sometimes our journey makes other people uncomfortable, and I think there's a point sometimes where we have to hold the space for ourselves, and stop worrying about how uncomfortable other people are. If we're not doing something harmful, or disruptive,
Right.
You just, sometimes our healing journey does make people uncomfortable because they're not ready, and it puts them in that place, and they're still hiding, and that's okay. But we have to be careful that other people's hiding doesn't cause us not to give ourselves permission, I think.
Right. Exactly.
Community can go both ways, right?
Right, exactly.
So, Dr. Cheri, I want to thank you so much for sharing such great insight and with such grace and gentleness. I think it's healing even in the way you communicate. It's very clear. And I want to honor you for what you do. And how can people get in touch with you if they need the kind of help? I'm sure most people need it when they come to realize there's something they need, someone to hold a space for them and help them through. How can people get in touch with you?
Probably there's a few ways. One is, www.askdrcheri.com, Cheri. You can also email me directly at drcheri@aplace2turn.com. And I'm on social media, Cheri MacDonald, LMFT, PhD. That's Facebook. And that's probably the easiest, the most prominent one I'm on. And so please reach out. And if they do reach out, I'm very passionate about this, and heal your trauma, heal your marriage, 7 steps to root, rebound, and rise. If they get content in one of those ways, I'm glad to send you a free Kindle version of the book. And I would love to get, to do that. I really want this break free movement to go forward and for us to heal as a community. I feel very passionate about that. I think it's key and for us evolving forward and having a much happier, joyful society to live in.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your mission with us today, Dr. Cheri.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure. And thank
Wonderful.
you.
So I'll tell you what, audience, Dr. Cheri is a resource. This is your opportunity. If you feel that feeling, the feeling, please subscribe down below to this channel, and all of the links that Dr. Cheri shared will be there. You can get to her immediately just by going down to the show notes underneath the description. As always, I want to thank you and honor you, my tribe, for joining us and for taking the time out of your life to get some life-giving, life-changing information. Please share this video with your friends. If someone popped into your head, just share this link. Let's get this message of healing and hope and helpful community out to the world. One person making one positive decision, sharing one link, you have no idea the ripple effect that can have. So, from Dr. Cheri and myself, we want to thank you for honoring us and honoring yourself by taking this time. And don't forget to subscribe down below, click through, connect with Dr. Cheri, and we will be sharing more life-giving information as time goes on. So don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.